working. Hi, everyone. This is incredibly exciting. I can't believe it's OC3. I've been making this joke recently about VR feeling like dog years, where every year in VR feels like 7 years in real life. How many of you have been, were at OC1, so I can get a show of hands? Nice. And also so I can get a gauge of the audience, how many of you have been developing VR for about a year? How about 2 years? Wow, how about 3 years? Nice, okay. So the way I thought of focusing this panel was around kind of going from first projects of these incredible creators to their latest projects and really getting an understanding of what we've learned so far. I watched the first OC1 keynote the other day around storytelling, and there was questions like, how does narrative even work for VR? What does it look like? And the words Wild Wild West was used way too much. So I'm glad that we're changing these terms. And so I'm Yelena Rachitsky. I work on the experiences side of Oculus, and I think a lot about how do we push creativity in VR? How do we broaden the categories? What's next? And just personally incredibly passionate about a lot of the powerful things that people are making. And also incredibly excited about these people to my left who are the ones that have been pushing VR over the past 3 years. And I'm excited to dig into their work and their insights. So rather than me having to introduce them, I'll let them go down and tell you a little bit about themselves.
Sure. Hi. My name is Félix Lajeunesse. I'm the co-founder, creative director of Felix and Paul Studios. And so we're a cinematic virtual reality studio focused on story-driven experiences. And yeah, that's who I am.
Yeah, and I'm going to show you a little bit of each of their early work and something later. So I think it's best to do that now. Let's see what we have next. So this is Felix's first project, Strangers with Patrick Watson. This is his piece he did with Jurassic Park. And this was with Fox on a VR experience based on the film Wild. It was the first celebrity in VR, right? Reese Witherspoon?
Yes.
Yeah.
Every day there's a sunrise and a sunset. And you can choose to be there for it. You can put yourself in the way of beauty.
And I think the next one is something that hasn't yet been talked about or announced yet. So you guys are the first ones to learn about this latest project, which is really a step forward for Felix and Paul. Do you want to give a little bit of an intro about it?
Sure. So the project is called Miyubi. It's a 40-minute original scripted narrative piece that we've created in partnership with Funny or Die and Oculus. And it's actually a story that puts you into the soul, the mind, and the body of a little Japanese robot in 1982. So it's going to be released later.
Yeah.
Oh, happy birthday, Dennis.
This is Miyubi, a real live robot, and my best friend. Miyubi, approach.
Wow, buddy, that is tremendous.
What the heck? I said
no toys at the table.
I didn't put it there. Hey, Mr. Bulldog!
It's time to crush the robot invasion before it crushes us.
My name is Don't Buddy.
Honey, this is
I will be your buddy.
They drink rum out of coconuts and no one wears any clothes.
Awesome. Cool. So we're going to dig into that into a little bit. And next, let me just skip the slide. Or what? Oh. Next, we have Jess Engel, who's the director of original content from Within.
Hi, yes, as Yelena said, I'm the director of original content at Within, which is Chris Milk and Aaron Koblenz. It's a VR technology company and an app for different kinds of original content from 360 video. We're now moving more into the game engine-based space as well. Formerly, I was at Virtualize in New York, and I've produced a variety of original and branded VR content.
Great. What do we have for you? Do you want to talk a little bit about this project?
Sure. So Giant is a project that premiered at Sundance earlier this year in January, and it's the creators of it are Melitza Zek and Winslow Porter, and it's about a family that it's basically takes place in a basement. It's about what a family goes through as these bombs are going off around them, and we shot this with 3 actors against a green screen, and we imported that into a gaming engine. It premiered on the CV1, and it's this one that I'm really proud of because it really uses acting in the space and kind of pushes the boundaries in terms of storytelling. It's not an interactive experience, but it's definitely an emotional experience, an installation-based experience right now.
Great.
And this is the most recent one that I did. It's called The Hubble or Fistful of Stars, and it premiered for 6,000 people at Prospect Park in Brooklyn. And it's about the Hubble telescope, and it premiered with a live opera. So this one really fuses live performance and storytelling in VR. And it was pretty amazing, this event, because we thought, over 6,000 people came to experience VR, to experience it together in this public setting.
Ray, hi. Do you have a microphone? There you go.
Hello. Hi, I'm Ray Tintori. I'm a director at Missing Pieces, which is a really great production company. It's doing a lot in VR right now. I come from a background of more narrative, kind of indie stuff. Did a lot of special effects on indie films. I did all the monster scenes in Beasts of Southern Wild. I've been doing VR for about a year. I did some interactive computer-generated video game stuff for GE, and then I made a piece for Honda, which I think we're going to watch.
We have a slide of that right now. There we go.
If all just can be sober, is let it die. Leaning on the everlasting side.
It's a super strange way to watch that. Yeah.
And how many of you guys saw the NBA piece? That was a 25-minute VR sports documentary, which got incredible press and was just such a groundbreaking project for VR documentary. We have a little clip of it right now, which Ray directed as well.
Does it again. Discover a unique, once-in-a-lifetime experience.
That's a guy that wants to see a Game 7.
Inside one of the most dramatic NBA finals of all time.
It's Bedlam here in Cleveland.
No team has ever come back from 3-1.
Curry, way downtown.
After we lost Game 4, I said, listen, let me lead you guys. Let's make history.
In the headset, everything feels much closer.
It's nearly impossible to show 360 content on a 2D screen. If someone figures it out, please let us know, because I think we're still figuring out how to do that. And my good friend Saschka Unseld, who I work closely with, do you want to describe yourself?
Describe my coffee stain?
I elbowed him while he was drinking coffee. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
I thought I would just own it. I thought it's a bit more rock.
It's an immersive coffee experience that he's really taking on.
My name is Saschka Unseld. I come from the world of animation, so for a long time I had an animation studio in Germany and then moved to the US and was at Pixar for 6 years and directed a short film called The Blue Umbrella there. And then left, and then VR came around. So together with Max Planck and Edward Saatchi, we co-founded Oculus Story Studio to explore kind of narrative in VR and how the heck does it work or doesn't it work. And I've been doing that now for 2 years, so.
Yeah, and we have a clip of Lost, which I think is interesting because you guys, Lost premiered at Sundance 2 years ago now, and it was with the question even of, can you tell a story in VR? And Lost was the project that showed, yes, we can begin seeing inklings of it. So I think it's a perfect one to show right now.
Yeah, the way we solved making a clip out of it, we just were like, nah, screw what you're gonna do. We're just gonna put new cameras into the set and shoot it. But yeah, it was interesting because at that time, everyone was like, nah, VR is not for storytelling and you don't even know where someone looks. How can you tell a story if you don't know where someone looks? And there were passionate debates about that it doesn't work or work, which now feels weird.
Yeah, it was only 2 years ago also. So 2 years later, one of your latest projects, which I'm going to show the clip of, steps forward. And this is called Dear Angelica.
So that doesn't give anything away.
Yeah,
no,
well, sorry.
Yeah, the Angelica is a strange project. It takes the shape of a girl writing a letter to her mother and about the memories they shared, but also about the movies her mother starred in because her mother was an actress. And most of the experience takes place inside of the girl's memories, and which posed the question, how would memories look like if we're inside of them? And when we remember things, how does it look like? And it felt like paintings are the most appropriate to how it feels like. And so the whole thing was created inside of VR, painted inside of VR. So when that was decided, we brought on Wesley Alsbrook, who's an amazing illustrator who's worked for the New York Times and the New Yorker and loads of others, and basically created a tool for her to translate her style into VR and then work with her to create that story.
Yeah, and what I love about this one of the many things, Saschka and I were having a conversation, and I think if you have an example like Lost, it looks like the woods. And if you think about film, where initially when film was started, they basically put a camera to look at a live theater show. And I think we're only slowly beginning to free our grasps from reality, of needing it to be in reality. And Dear Angelica is a project that takes you completely into imagination, which I think is an important thing for VR. Which brings me to a conversation that I had with Felix about 3 years ago when I was working at Sundance, and he first was talking about VR, and this is the first time I heard the word presence, which I think we've probably heard about it hundreds of times if we're working in VR now, but he was the first one who mentioned it to me. But I'm really curious, Felix, of presence and what you meant when you first started, and your first project was Strangers with Patrick Watson, right? To how you're redefining what could be considered presence within some of your latest projects, which isn't necessarily just planting you into a space.
Sure. I think when we started at the time, like those projects that you've seen, the earliest one is Strangers. It was shot in 2013, sort of mid-2013, which is, I guess, in VR standards, like prehistoric age. And at the
Dinosaur
time,
age, yes.
Yeah. At the time, I don't think our intention was to tell a story. At the time, what we wanted to do is really capture reality, film reality, and create sort of an intimate experience where, as a viewer, you're just allowed to be there. You're just allowed to be into the experience. And really, everything we were trying to do with that experience was all about crafting that sense of truly being in the moment and deepening that sense of emotional connection to that character, to the environment, and allowing viewer to really feel all the details, explore the space, explore that human being, and just really be there. And there was no better way to convey that experience than, I think, that word presence, which, by the way, we did not invent. It comes from earlier researches in regards to virtual reality that date back to the 1990s, and someone coined that term. And when I read about it, I was like, this is the word that we're sort of trying to convey in our experiences, I guess. And so the earlier project we've done were not... they were just one moment, one segment of reality. Like, for example, Jurassic World is a unified moment, so there's no cuts. You're just there in the forest with that dinosaur. While the experience that you've also seen, you're just there with the actresses, and everything happens within that one unified moment. And the reason why we didn't want to do cuts at the time is that we felt that we needed to align those experiences to physical reality. Like in physical reality, there is no cut. And sometimes we wish there were cuts, but it's not the way it works, unfortunately. And so it's a continuous flow of events. And we thought presence was about doing that, replicating that. And so all of those experiences were unified. Even the first Cirque du Soleil experiences we created, called Curious, was a 9-minute shot, you know? So the whole story had to be built from within that one moment. And eventually, we kind of felt, producing more work, that this was great, it worked, but it was a little, it created some constraints from a creative standpoint. And we felt we wanted to depart from that and explore other ways to express presence. And so one thing that we found out through our projects is that you can define presence in many different ways. You can express it in many different ways in a VR project. One thing that we found out, and I think it kind of ties to your project, Saschka, in a certain way. I haven't seen it fully, but I feel some similarities with what I'm going to say, is that you can think of immersing viewer into a space, like the viewer is there in an environment, he looks around, but you can also think of immersing viewers into the mind of a character. And sort of embracing a character's subjectivity, even in an evocative way, and sort of using the mind of that character as the storytelling device. And so embracing the whole, world of memories and projections and flashbacks and visions. And the mind is a much more fluid and liquid, approach to reality than physical reality itself, which is a continuous and rigid flow, right? And so, so this is really what we started to do. And so, for example, we released recently a project called Through the Ages that we did with President Obama. And there are a lot of moments that you're just immersed in nature, but you hear his voiceover, and it's very it's very calm, and it makes it feel like an inner experience. It makes it feel like, yes, you're in the nature, but you're sort of in the mind of this character, the president, and it feels like you're sort of in his thoughts, and so therefore it's easier to transport the viewer from one place to another place and to another place into a story, and it remains coherent, and you remain present as a viewer because everything is happening from under the umbrella of the mind of that character. If that makes sense. I know it sounds a little abstract, but we do that a lot in our projects more and more, and I think that this allows us to embrace more complex forms of storytelling while maintaining what we think is still the holy grail of VR, which is presence.
And how did you do that with Mayubi, where the inner world is a robot?
So you're an artificial consciousness in Miyubi, and so basically the whole story is told from the point of view of that 2 feet high robot. So it's very, very low angle. Even the children look like giant. And each scene begins when someone turns you on, and it activates the robot, and it cuts when someone shuts you down and when you run out of battery, basically. And we also have inside of that story, which sort of follows your relationship as the robot with that family over the course of a year, we also have sort of hidden scenes and Easter egg scenes that are like programs that are inside of your robot's brain, and that can be triggered, that can be launched, and so that's a way that we use to sort of add interactive layers of storytelling, but everything that happens inside of that story is under the umbrella of you being the consciousness of that robot, and therefore it keeps that coherence that I think is important in regards to who you are as the viewer inside of the piece.
Yeah, no, and I'm really curious about it being a comedy, because I don't think any of us have really seen comedy done well, but we'll dig into that in a little bit. Based on this conversation about how you started with presence and it needing to be a reality and no cuts, to learning how cuts work, takes me to Ray's piece with the NBA, which I think broke a lot of what we initially assumed were rules. And cuts and edits in VR have been a huge topic of conversation and controversy, all the way from no edits and no cuts to, yeah, let's just cut. And the NBA piece is just such a step forward, because it creates a really unique narrative, and it's compelling for 25 minutes. And what I loved was the press mentioned that it's not necessarily just the most technically, you see some scene lines and you see things, but because you're compelled with the story, that stuff doesn't matter and that stuff disappears, and that's, to me, a successful project. So I'm really curious, and I think everyone else would be here as well, how you approached a lot of those decision making of bringing scenes together and what the intent of the feeling was, and how you used the tools of VR to bring that forward.
Also, how much footage did you have?
How much footage? We shot for 3 weeks.
How many hours?
I think by day 4, there was some amount of terabytes that we'd shot that was just horrifying. And early on it was like, hey, don't shoot too much. And then by the 4th time, something amazing and synchronistic happened in front of us, and we weren't rolling because we were trying to protect hard drives. We were like, okay, we're just going to shoot a lot more than we were supposed to. So, yeah, there's a ton of footage. I don't know the exact number, but it was disgusting. So I co-directed this with Gabe Spitzer, who's a really established and really brilliant sports filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, and had done a bunch of work for an HBO show called 24/7. And kind of when the project started, the goal was to take kind of that 24/7 Gabe Spitzer kind of sports storytelling, documentary storytelling. It's very kind of has a lot of impressionistic cutting and a lot of cuts in it that it's very voiceover heavy, and it's funny and human, but it also has kind of a sense of the larger kind of emotions of sports, and becomes very poetic at times. And early on when we were talking about it, they were like, so we can only do 20-second cuts, somebody told us, so we have to figure out how to tell a story this complicated, and they were like, a lot of our cuts are just be a guy, it doesn't even really make sense, it's just motion that has the right emotional resonance cut with music, and it's very impressionistic, so how are we going to do that? And I basically said, I think we should try to hold on to that as much as possible, and just try not to make it a excruciating physical experience for people. So I think we were always just trying to, there's shots where the camera's moving in it that are very carefully put in there in a way. We tested and tested and tested it. How do we incorporate a moving shot that we absolutely need to tell the story without making people sick? And what we got to in the end was kind of, I think most of our shots are 6 seconds, 8 seconds long on the short end, and some of them breathe longer. And, in the edit, it's just a big process of, you find the 3 people in your office that get the sickest the fastest, and then you keep testing it on them, and just kind of seeing how long, what's the rule. And I think some of the stuff that we figured out on this one, which I wouldn't recommend for every project, but I think was appropriate for this one, considering the subject matter and the kind of footage we were getting, was, we could do motion shots, but we'd kind of have to pad them out. We'd have to have like maybe 3 or 4 static shots in between every motion shot, and we'd have to have the motion shot, if it has to be a straight line, or else if it starts to veer side to side, then people start to get really sick.
So how long did you feel like you can make the motion go continuously before you had to go to a static shot?
It was mostly just when every shot's a little different, If it's making everyone really sick, it's probably not working. There's some shots in there that I really like that are my favorite shots.
A lot of field testing, apparently.
That make some people really nauseous.
And how did you decide to juxtapose the different scenes that you did? Is there something you can take us in specific within the project that we put this scene with this scene to really create this type of experience?
And that was the most fun thing. Because also the process we were shooting it, and we weren't editing it really until everything was shot. So kind of the first cutting together, the first 8 minutes of it was really I'm not sure this is going to work. And the first time that it was oh, there's a cut, and that cut meant something because it juxtaposed 2 things that are really different.
What was that? Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, it was a shot of LeBron being around a bunch of people, and then a shot of Steph Curry walking alone, And it was just all of a sudden became really emotional because there was a difference between the 2 guys. And then early on there was a scene where they're both, before game 1, heading to the field, and it's I think this will work because there's this team and there's that team, and one's moving this way and one's moving the other way. They're color-coded. It's really easy. I think the project, it works in part because the subject matter, even if it's low resolution, basketball's so physical, and they're enormous people, and all the big story pivots happen in a completely physical way. And they're characters that everyone already cares about a lot. Mm-hmm. It's like directing a Marvel movie now, I think, where it's everything's already been established. You just have to do something really exciting with them.
Yeah.
And I think the main feeling when we were shooting was just, I think that series turned out to be a really great dramatic series that had perfect Joseph Campbell, Robert McKee story structure. And so I think our feeling was we're in the middle of it. We're just in the middle of a great story. A great story is happening all around us, and let's try to do the best possible job that we can to get some of it in the camera.
And is there something that, if you were shooting this in 2D and making a traditional sports documentary around this, that you had to do differently or approached it differently because of both the limitations and the possibilities of the tools of VR?
Yeah, all sports docs, it's all long lenses. They're all super far away because the main thing is they're just terrified that you're going to affect the outcome of the game. So they want you. So every shot we are exactly as close and probably 6 inches closer than where they told us we could be. And basically we kind of earned the NBA's trust more and more as the series went on. And kind of anticipated that from the beginning. And early on we said, as long as it feels like you're getting closer and closer throughout the course of the movie, there's never a moment where you're getting close and then they yell at us because we messed up and now we have to shoot everything from back.
So how were you able to create that intimacy with not being able to get as close as you would with long lenses and the close-ups?
How do we create that intimacy? I think the most intimate shot is at the very end. By the time it's game 7, they were letting us put our cameras on the scores table. So we're right with the coach when he's really freaking out at the end of game 7, and we're got that kind of miraculous pre-game 7, the closest, we get the closest to them at the most pivotal moment.
Yeah.
Which is really, there's a lot of really lucky, nice stuff, but also just Gabe's a really good sports director, so he knew that was the place to be at that point.
Great.
But I would have gone way closer if I could have.
The conversation about intimacy reminds me of Jess's project with Giant, and I'd love for Jess to talk a little bit about, because Jess comes a lot from development and casting and understanding how a story works in VR, and experimented with actors in VR, and I know there was some challenges that you had with Giant, so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your process of how do you find acting for Giant and what you saw worked and what you wished you had more of.
Sure. And I just have to say, Ray, I really liked the NBA piece. And I think, too, the intimacy question's kind of interesting with that one as well, because I think there's different ways to create intimacy in this space. It's not always about the physical distance, it's about the emotional distance. And so by the end of it, 25 minutes in this experience, in this story, by the end you feel very in it, you know? And so when they win, I almost cried at the end of that piece. It was crazy. So I just thought that was very well done. But in terms of Giant, so the way that we had, a lot of that was technical limitations, because we had to shoot it with 3 actors against a green screen. And so, you know, I'm definitely very interested in how acting is going to evolve in the medium. I feel like we're just really starting to scratch the surface of what that can be. And with Giant, there's a physical distance. You know, you can't really get up and get really close to the characters. And again, that was mainly because we worked with James George and their volumetric capture with the depth kit. And so, but you know, we also had to cast that in like 2 weeks. And even with acting in the space, like there's different acting varies depending on what the platform or what the medium is. So theater acting is very different from film acting, and I think VR acting is going to be different as well. You know, theater acting, you really have to project, and with film, it's more intimate because you can put a screen right to an actor's face and feel that emotion. And I think in VR, it's going to be even more real, you know, because in essence, you're actually there with the characters, or maybe you are the character, you know. And so, if somebody is projecting and it's a very sort of, you can tell that somebody's acting right next to you, you're not going to feel that emotional connection that you're kind of striving for. So, yeah, I'm super interested in how we're going to evolve acting in the space and performance and intimacy, whether it is like a physical being very close to somebody, or just through the performance itself, and how you can create that in different ways.
Yeah, and you work a lot with traditional filmmakers and a lot of first-time VR filmmakers, and giving them an understanding of how to take their skills and work with VR. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you approach that, what you do with them, and how you see their skills translating into VR.
So yeah, so I come from an indie film background before I got into VR, and it was like first-time VR filmmakers. I feel like everyone's basically first-time VR filmmaker, but you know, the way that I've really approached it is, you know, I think that it's exciting when there's, you know, Ray is from more of a traditional background and has gotten into VR, and I think it's really exciting when a director wants to embrace this new format. And I think it's really about education and putting a headset on and watching different experiences and seeing in those experiences what you connect with. And from there, then you see, okay, how can I recreate that for somebody? You know, and I think that filmmakers do that in film right now. You know, you watch a movie and you're like, oh, I remember that moment in that movie, and this is why I want to make movies, you know, to create those moments for people, or to create a sense of those moments for people. And so I think it's really getting a sense of what you connect with, and what, you know, like I remember with Josephine Decker as a filmmaker that I've been working with, and we have a project that we went to the Sundance New Frontier Labs with, and I just put the headset on her and had her watch like a bunch of things. And it was actually after one of Gabo's pieces, that Waves of Grace, she came out and she was just like, okay, I want to create something that I know that gives somebody that emotion. And that's how we started developing something together.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I was talking to Ted Chilowitz earlier today, and we talked about everyone just needs to watch a lot of stuff. That's really sometimes the only way, is just watching a lot of stuff.
Can I jump in? Again, at Missing Pieces, there's a lot of directors that are 2D directors that now it's basically like every director there has done a VR project and are learning how to do it. So I've been like responsible for like jumping in a lot of people this year, and that's absolutely the first thing I say. Is I would say, you know, the nice thing is there isn't that much stuff out there compared to how many books and how many films and whatever there are. So just watch everything and figure out like what do you like, you know, and like everyone. You're gonna like different stuff than other people do. You'll have a threshold for stuff that other people don't. It's like not every album should sound pleasing to everyone the second it turns on, and
Yeah, the goal of VR is to get that individual person's creativity and for us to experience that. So Saschka, I love that with Lost, when I've talked about it a lot too, but so much of the lessons the 3 lessons that we talked a lot about with Lost was the in, the letting go, and the call to story. But basically the call to story is somewhat the very beginning of it. So you ended Lost with the call to story, and now you're all the way at Dear Angelica, which is just full-on story. So there's a lot of stuff in between then. I know Henry came in between then. But how do you begin to talk about your experience with story in VR after we've already called for it? How do you think about it now?
I'm trying to choose my words wisely, because when I look at the video we created with Story Studio 2 years ago, I want to just die. So choose my words wisely. No, it's true that we learn a lot while trying those things out, and then in hindsight we're like, oh, these are the things we did. So with Lost, these things, the in, the letting go, and the call to story came from, we created it, and we're like, what the heck did we do, and what worked? Oh, this worked really well. Let's kind of put them into words. And with Henry, we talked about that. It was this thing of, we wanted an intimate moment with Henry. So initially we thought, oh, Henry sits down really close next to us, so that's the same thing as a close-up when he's really sad and crying. And then it turns out it's not the same as a close-up, because if someone sits this close to you when that character is crying, it's kind of uncomfortable, and you just want to give that character space. So a character being far away from you made you feel much more intimately connected to that character when that character is sad than if the character is really close. Because in live action, actually, and we just realized, oh, we're just stupid, you would use a really long lens when you shoot a close-up. You would never be with the camera right up the actor's face. So even though it's a close-up, the camera is far away. But then with the Angelica, I think the closest to that is, I started to be concerned a lot and think a lot about what is in people's heads when they watch it. What are they thinking? Like, they're in a new place, what's going through people's head? And then trying to shape that narrative of what will be in people's heads. An example, for example, in the Angelica, it starts with this girl, Jessica, in her bedroom writing a letter. And we had an illustration of the full bedroom, and it drew in around you, and you were there with her. And I realized when people were in it, the thoughts in their head were like, oh, there's a girl in the bed. Oh, there's a shelf with stuff in it. Oh, there's a rug on the floor. Oh, there's a window, I can look out the window. But I didn't want these thoughts in people's head. It was a girl in the bed writing a letter. So we actually just removed the whole bedroom. And it's in front of black. And there's just this singular thought that is in your head at that moment, and this singular moment that you're in. And then once you go into her memory, the whole memory unfolds around you. But again, it was kind of realizing, oh, wait, I don't want people to think about all these other things already. And I think a lot of that shaped the way I'm thinking more about narrative. And it's about, and I think you cut on it as well, it's about moments that you're in. When you talked about presence, you used a lot the word being. And for me, the word being I can emotionally connect to, like a certain way of being, a certain way of being in a space in a moment, because being is a moment. So when we go into the memory of her, we start with kind of a never-ending story-like movie. So I wanted it to feel like you're in this childlike joy of a memory of a movie like this. So that's the kind of being, that's the kind of thoughts I want to create in your head. So you shape everything around it in order to shape that experience around it. And I think that kind of flow seems to work really well.
Yeah, what's interesting is that it's similar things that you and Felix are talking about, but yours is a very intimate personal story, and Felix's is a comedy. I'd be interested in that conversation between how you created set and space and tone and feeling to elicit that with something that feels intimate and emotional, and for Felix, something that feels is meant to feel more about humor, and also this kind of genre bending, which is happening with VR, that we're redefining categories. So maybe you can start with how you approached the set in space and the experience to create humor, and then with Saschka a little more on how that happened with creating a completely opposite feeling.
So we chose 1982 as a year because we felt it would be like a delight in terms of just being immersed in that specific time. And through the story, you actually visit a lot of different rooms inside of the house where a lot of those stories and there are dramatic moments in the film. So those dramatic moments happen and the comedic moment happen. And we actually worked a lot into creating all of those environments. So every single detail inside of each of those rooms has been carefully curated to be exact in terms of the time you're in. And so, like, for example, when you're in the kids' room, there are about 1,000 toys in there. They are all toys from that specific year and time. And so all of that puts you in a state of mind when you experience it, something highly nostalgic, at least for my generation, and you connect emotionally to the set. Like, you know, so even if you're not actually witnessing what the actors are doing, you start exploring the set, the environment informs you emotionally about the story, and you remain connected to the story even if you're not watching the main character, basically. So I think that you were asking about the set. I think for us the art direction, the set are truly an important part of the story in virtual reality, given that we know that viewers are not going to be directed into looking always at what you expect them to look, and they're going to wander off and they're going to sort of explore the experience in their own way, at their own pace. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, if they look away from the main point of interest, they need to remain connected to the story. And so how do you do that? So make sure that the environment contributes in telling the story too, you know? So that's an important aspect for the process, I think. Yeah.
I just really liked when you said wander off and you wandered off the microphone. It was great. I think similarly, it's about, I think thinking about how someone comes out of the experience is important. Like what you remember after you've gone through it, not being necessarily in each moment, but afterwards. And at one point, the script was very bloated and there was tons of stuff going on, and then we cut it down to feeling like, well, the first thing I want you to feel is childlike joy and wonder. I want to curate the room around it like this, that you feel this way. The things you see, the music, everything should just feel like when you were a kid again. And then the next moment, and that takes its time, and then the next moment should be excitement, adventure, kind of that more energetic thing. And then we switch to something that goes more into fear and scary and dangerous, and then something into sad. So if we just think of these pure emotions, I kind of disconnect myself from the intricacies from a movie where you need to follow every single beat, but I can curate a space and the acting and everything more about a sense of being in that moment. And it is that sense of being you want to shape, because that is less time dependent. You don't need to catch every single moment, but you can just be in that space. And if I can manage to make you feel that way, I can line up these moments, and then you have a narrative.
And, you know, I saw the early version of your piece, The Dear Angelica, at Sundance, and I remember we talked right after, and I said that that's your greatest piece in my perspective, because I felt it was liberating. And by that I mean, you know, my mind is free right now. Like I might be talking, but if I want to visualize outer space as I talk, I'm doing it right now. Mm-hmm. I see it, like it's right there in my mind. And so I'm sure that as I'm talking right now, there are some people thinking about their grandmothers or thinking about I don't know what, you know. So the mind is free. And I think that a lot of what I experienced when I watched your piece is that I felt that it was about that. It was sort of embracing this kind of flow of imagination, and I felt it was speaking to the nature of how the mind operates, you know, and I felt that, and for me that was like, yes, there was a story there. I felt that there was like a narrative construction, but there was enough breathing room for my own imagination to sort of explore your world, right? And it really, like, that's one thing when we talk about VR storytelling that I think is very important, whether it's an interactive or a non-interactive or a fiction or a non-fiction piece. For me, it's not about telling a story to someone. It's about an encounter between viewer and the experience. And it's as much about the story that we tell than what the viewer sort of brings to it with his own subjectivity and sort of presence. And I think it's almost like, sometimes we frame it almost as a kind of a dialogue, you know, like it's something that it's an encounter between a viewer and a story. It's an experience. That's the nature of an experience. And I think that, yeah, I just felt like I fell in love with that piece for that reason. I felt it really sort of embraced that idea in a powerful and poetic way.
And it's also and when I talked about set, the thing that's different about Dear Angelica is the play with scale and with environment, where you realize you can break from that reality. And if you want to mention that a little bit, Saschka, to talk about how those change in relation to...
Yes, scale was an absurd, coincidental discovery. So Wesley, who did by hand every stroke you will see in the Angelica and painted everything by hand, we created a tool for her to work kind of on it and make and realize it that way. And but what do you do if you want to paint something that is an enormous kind of full-on desert-like scale thing, like a massive set? You can't like walk all the way there to make that brush stroke. So of course she needs functionality to just move around in the world. But then if you want to paint a really tall building, you would need to move up there and then paint it, and it doesn't work. So we realize, well, she needs to scale the whole world down, paint it with it in tiny, and then scale it up again, just as a process for her to work.
Yeah, and I don't know if everyone knows here that Dear Angelica was created with Quill, which is a tool that Story Studio created that Wesley was able to hand draw actually every scene. So every scene is her stroke in her hand.
Yeah, with a touch controller. She worked full time in VR. And she also would want to work sitting and not always walk around in a massive room to just lean down and paint like the tires of a car and be on the floor for that. You just want to work on it. And so once we had that ability, there was this moment with Jessica in her bed, and there's multiple moments like this, and we looked at her life size, because you think everything should be life size, and then to move her somewhere else, we scale her down. So you suddenly had this tiny bed with a tiny character in it. And not only that, it was kind of at this height. So you needed to bend over to look at her. And the relationship you formed with the character and with the world when you have to look down, and when you have to kind of, when you're big and something is tiny and fragile, became something really powerful. So in a lot of moments we play with scale changes of something really small and intimate and something massive happening around it, and kind of finding a flow of where that makes sense for the narrative. And I'm actually really curious if at one point we can have that with live action, where you feel like you have an view into someone's room, and then you're feeling like you're inside of it. It's nearly like in a movie, you have a wide shot and then a close-up. I think the relationship of you, the way you are in the space, is so important, and the way how it feels different when everything is tiny is such a massive shift that for building any kind of narrative or orchestration of a change of emotion that you want to go through, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and a lot of people, when they talk about VR, they talk about creating for intimacy, but Jess worked on a project that was inherently meant to be social. Can you talk about developing for the Hubble project, where it was meant to be a large group of people experiencing it at once, and how you approach that differently?
Yeah, okay, so that was directed by Eliza McNitt. I realize I never mentioned that. But with that, it's not a narrative in the sense of like we're following two characters. It's more of, I would say, like an homage to, or not homage, but it's more to really celebrate the Hubble telescope and the legacy that it's brought to us. And so what Eliza really wanted to do is, take you on a journey in space. And I would say one of the most powerful moments in that piece was really part of it was just like the buildup of it. Getting 6,000 people together. They listened to a 40-minute opera performance in Prospect Park, and then people were prompted to put the headset on and to journey into space and all the sound. So everyone was like, isolated in their headsets, but then listening to the same music together. And there was this incredible moment where the Hubble kind of comes at you, and you hear the crowd gasp at the same time. And I just remember kind of getting chills at that moment because, everyone's sort of experiencing this thing that we've created for them, in this simulated environment, but together. And, just sort of transporting people in that way. I mean, I think that's kind of what movies do too, right? You're sitting in a theater and you're watching something, but you hear people laugh, and that makes you laugh and react to it, or you hear people yell or cry, and that can make you respond to what you're watching even more. And so, that's what I thought was really special about this, was that you're experiencing, the content, but you're also it's this collective experience, with other people. So, I think we learned a lot from that, and kind of getting those sort of visceral reactions was one of the more powerful moments in it.
Yep, wonderful. So in the past 2 years, I think we've figured out that we can move the camera, that we can make cuts, that story actually works. We're luckily not using the word Wild Wild West that much anymore. So thinking now future, with all of you guys being in the trenches of VR for the past couple of years, what are you hoping to see or make? What do you think is the necessary next step to keep pushing VR a little bit forward to become what we all want it to be? Maybe we'll start with you, Felix.
Sure. A lot of the things, we have approximately 40 projects in development right now in the fiction and nonfiction space, and most of them are serialized. And I think that coming out of those first 3 years of creating VR work, we've been creating one-off experiences, like the Jurassic World was a one-off, and The Strangers was a one-off, and the Obama piece also was one experience. And so I think that moving forward, we try to look at content creation in a more ambitious way and thinking about, okay, what about telling a story over 6 episodes, over 8 episodes, and try to create that sense of I'm watching something, an experience, and I want to go back and sort of continue my engagement with that story in the next episode, and sort of bringing that model to virtual reality feels like an absolutely necessary step from my perspective.
The narrative stuff that I'm writing right now is all for kind of like more light field capture, positional tracking, where there's like a dramatic scene going on and you can walk around and stand as close to the character in a different part of the room. That is really, really exciting to me. It's super challenging. It's an incredible mind puzzle. I'm really excited for that, just when there's just even a little, like anything, where there's you're looking at live action and you tilt your head and it doesn't make you, it responds and you feel like you're there. That's the thing. That, and actually like everyone that try the VR headset on the first time, they like reach out and try to touch something. It'd be nice if they actually touch something. That seems like that'll be really great when that happens.
Definitely what Felix said about serialized content. I think, we've had a lot of definitely one-off experiences and creating stuff where a story builds over time, and maybe it actually is living in real time, and then you go back in it and sort of see it evolve. Could be really interesting. I think in terms of live action, we're still in such early days of what that can be. Like, again, I think, real production design and acting that is really high quality and really is super intimate. I definitely want to explore that more, and something that we're doing at Within. And then in terms of, volumetric capture, being able to walk around a space, definitely, and also being in spaces with people, so multiplayer. journeys and just kind of redefining or continuing to define what a story, what a narrative experience in VR is. We just really don't, we still don't, we're developing different types of what that is, and so I'm excited to kind of keep exploring and pushing where that goes.
Choose your words carefully, Saschka.
To be honest, like after you said, like, so now we've learned we can do cuts and we can move the camera, took us 2 years. I think coming out of the Angelica, the biggest thing for me is kind of just being less scared. Mm-hmm. Like it took us 2 years to be like, no, we can do cuts. And no, don't be scared to move the camera, even if someone might maybe get motion sick. I feel like just kind of being a bit bolder and just experimenting more and like, fuck it, maybe it doesn't work, but not preemptively being too careful. I think it inhibits us to move fast if we're always so preemptively worried about things, like that you move the camera and that you did all that stuff and like, screw it that the stitches are not right, like a bit more coffee stains, a bit more kind of, be a bit more pushy and just try shit.
Yeah.
I think that's for me the biggest thing.
Yeah, but a lot of people have just created their first, second projects and have, I can do this, and in agreement with you, to be bold. Maybe that's what this year is, and the next year we come back and see how bold people were, and people are like, no, let's take a step back, too bold. But I think we have time for maybe a question or two. Do we have any microphones in the back? I have lights in my eyes, so I can't see, but, oh, there we go, perfect.
Hi, Avinash from We Make VR here. What we're seeing with users when we create cinematic experiences, especially new users, the first 30, 40 seconds, they're looking around all over the place, and then they kind of converge on this 120-degree area in front of them. So what we've done so far to work with that is when we cut, we reposition the shot to make sure that the core area of interest is kind of where they are, especially since a lot of users are sitting down, which gets them to move around less and look around less. How do you guys deal with that? What's your point of view on that kind of user experience or user interaction?
Yeah, start.
Okay, so a lot of what we worked on in the cut was just making sure that we weren't losing people and they weren't constantly looking at the wrong, there are more and less digressive viewers. And I really like digressive viewers, and I always want there to be something worth looking at when you look away from whatever, like in a normal film, like that's where the camera would be looking. We did the same thing. We kind of, whenever I show people stuff, I try to get them to stand up and just put their hand on a chair so that they look around more. People don't do it right now, so knowing that everyone, for the most part, is sitting down and your shoulder, it's like a rubber band, so if people got lost, we generally kept everything kind of ping-ponging back and forth. Like we really paid attention to, like if you're looking at LeBron and he walks over here, then like have Steph Curry be over here, and then so we're on that kind of 120, like 180 axis a lot. And then if someone's looking behind them and when they come back, the stuff's playing in front of them, so they kind of catch the thread again, if that makes sense. But yeah, we worked on that a lot, because it's really not a good feeling to feel like every time there's a cut, because you lose sync with the thing, you're always out of sync and you're always trying to catch up. Like that's a terrible feeling. Yeah.
I think there is definitely such a thing as shot composition in virtual reality, just like there is in regular cinema. And there's generally, there's sort of a way to think about the narrative of how viewers will explore the space. Like to a certain extent, you can anticipate those things a little bit. And I think what you were describing, this idea of choosing what is the 0 point, what is your anticipation of where viewers will engage into a specific shot, is something that we think about a lot when we actually do edit our projects. And so we generally think, oh, okay, like most likely, because it's never a precise science, viewers will end up, that sequence engaged, in this kind of body position, and therefore we try to create the 0 point, of the next shot at a place that connects with the previous one. So I think that you would do that in traditional cuts in cinema, trying to align points of interest in a way, or make them kind of complementary. We do approach it in a similar perspective, I would say, in VR.
For us, it's always an educated guess based on experience, but you haven't gone a next step. You haven't developed any theories or on how
theories, no, you go with the feeling, you know, like it depends on the pacing of your piece. I think that, for example, your piece is fast-paced in my standards, I would say. So I think it's quite a challenge to define that or to make that sort of, to be able to really predict where a viewer is going to be. I think a lot of the work we've created is, I would say, slower paced a little bit, and so it might, with a relatively more like a calmer pace, it's a little easier maybe to envision where viewers would land. So it all depends on the rhythm of the piece, of the emotion you're trying to convey, and I think you take it from there. You sort of, yeah.
Can I add just one more thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Also, one of the really nice things about right now, you don't show something to someone, have them watch it, and then they fill out a test card telling you which parts they liked. As you're showing it to someone, you're seeing a feed of exactly where they're looking. So you really do get to kind of test out stuff and be like, is it working? Like, does it work for 8 people out of 10, or does it work for 3? You know? And so basically every cut, it was like finesse it, rotate the horizon of the world, and make it so that most people like come in a nice, because there's a frame, like you have a proscenium in your head, and so you're framing shots, and if someone's looking in the right place, it'll be a really lovely shot, and then they can go digress as much as they want, you know.
We use heat mapping for that, to track exactly that post-production, but not during the actual production process. Do you do that?
While I'm shooting,
Well, while you're editing your piece, since your shot orientation is something that you can adjust while you're in post-production.
Yeah, the edit, that was half of the edit, was rotating the horizon of the world. Yeah, it was a huge part of what we did.
It's very confusing on stage because binaural audio is broken. You stand there and your voice comes from here.
Yeah.
It is the most amazing thing.
Do you have another? I think one more. We're a little bit out of time, so just one last question, and then we're gonna have to end.
Curious. But thank you. How you represent in VR things that are abstract, like emotion, let's say depression, and I'm thinking of something like a film like What Dreams May Come, where in brief the story is his wife commits suicide, he dies, and he's in heaven trying to find her, and it's very abstract, and they represent her depression as something very negative. So I'm curious the range that you guys of stories you talked about, from the framing to more just interactive environments, like how you would tackle something like emotion, depression, something like that.
It's a big question.
Wow.
I mean, maybe, yeah. I think you need to be inherently careful with the viewer or visitor or however you call the person that watches the VR experience, because, and it is something that I actually find really intriguing about VR, is that you watch VR when you're alone. You're by yourself. Like, you cut out the world, there's no one next to you. You're alone, which is a fragile state to be in. And not only are you alone, you don't even have a body. And robbing someone of being grounded in the world through a body and just removing it makes you even more fragile and more easily wounded. So I think once you go into more difficult emotional states, and if you want to make someone feel difficult emotional states, I think you need to be very, very careful with the vulnerability that a viewer in VR has. I think it's really important to push into those emotions, and hopefully in the Angelica we're trying to do that a bit. But I think taking care of your viewer's emotional state is immensely important during those moments.
Great. Well, we're a little bit over time, not to end on the depressing note, but maybe we should all go out with our phrase of this year, which is be bold. And I know I personally can't wait to see what everyone's going to make this year. The most exciting thing is the unknown of it all. And I think it sounds like most of you are going to be those people, and definitely you guys. So be bold. And thank you. Thank you for coming.